The torchlit Cathedral of Caerwith had not seen a gathering this vast in 7 generations. Marith Vale pressed her back against the carved stone of the northern gallery, one trembling hand braced against a pillar older than any kingdom in the valley. Below her, 1,000 candles burned in hammered iron basins, and beneath each flame stood a face she recognized: chieftains in deep green cloaks, warlords in polished silver. Mothers and fathers and daughters who had crossed frozen passes and midnight rivers to witness what was about to happen. The binding. Her stomach turned. She should not have climbed these stairs. She should not have slipped past the guards in their heavy furs. Should not have paid the old chapel keeper the last of her silver to show her the servants' route to the upper galleries. She should have stayed in the little room behind the kitchens where she had been waiting for 3 nights. 3 nights of unanswered knocks and unspoken promises. 3 nights of watching the candle in her window burn down to nothing while the man she loved sent no word at all. But a woman does not simply vanish from her own heart, and so she had come to see with her own eyes the thing that would break her forever. On the raised platform at the far end of the cathedral stood Caelan Draith, Alpha King of the 4 Rivers, sovereign of every pack that drew breath between the eastern sea and the mountains that had no name. Even from the height of the gallery, Marith could make out the heavy line of his shoulders beneath the ceremonial black, the sharp stillness of his jaw, the tight curl of his dark hair against his temple, where she had once pressed her lips in the stillness before dawn. For 8 months, she had known a different Caelan, the one who came to her in the narrow hours of the night, who whispered her name like something sacred, who had once laid his forehead against hers and sworn on the blood of his ancestors that no woman alive could ever take her place in his heart. The one who had pressed his teeth to the hollow beside her shoulder blade and marked her in secret, on a moonless night in the winter garden when the snow had muffled every sound but their breathing. When the crown settles and the pack elders have spoken, he had promised her, his hand spread flat over her heart. I will stand before every soul in this valley and name you mine. No one will ever doubt you again. Not ever. She had believed him the way a drowning woman believes the first taste of air. Her hand drifted to her stomach, to the flat plane that would not stay flat for much longer. To the secret she had meant to tell him tonight, after the ceremony, when he came to her door the way he always did. 2 lives, not 1. She had felt it 3 mornings ago when the healer woman in the kitchens had taken her wrist and gone very still, and then said, quietly, that the rhythm beneath her skin was wrong. Not wrong. Doubled. Twins. She had laughed and wept at the same time. She had pictured his face when she told him. She had practiced the words in the dark. The chosen will now rise, intoned the voice of the high seer, and the sound of it moved through the cathedral the way a slow tide moves through a cave. Marith's nails drove crescents into her palms. 7 women rose from the front benches, 7 daughters of the great houses, each one gowned in pale cream, each one veiled in thin silver. They walked toward the platform in a single unbroken line, and the crowd drew breath as one, because this was the moment the valley had waited for since Caelan had taken the crown 4 years before. At the head of the line walked Verlaine of House Ormsgate, her hair the color of new copper, her throat bare to the torchlight. Her family held the Eastern Pass. Her uncle commanded 5,000 spears. She had been groomed since her 10th summer for exactly this procession, and it showed in every measured step she took. Marith searched the platform for the man she knew. She searched for a flicker, a turn of the head, a sign that the bond she wore beneath her dress was burning in him too. His face was carved from winter. Caelan of House Draith, blood of the first howl, the high seer called out. The elders have spoken. The pack has counseled. The crown awaits its queen. The silence that followed was the longest silence Marith had ever heard. She could not breathe. The mark at the back of her shoulder burned like a coal pressed under her skin, and she knew he could feel it, because that was what the mark was for. That was what he had told her when he gave it to her. No matter where in the world you walk, He had whispered against her ear. I will feel your heart against mine as if it beats inside my own chest. Surely, surely he would turn now. Surely he would speak her name instead. Kaelin stepped forward, and something in the way he moved was wrong. It was a small thing, a thing only she would notice, because she had watched him cross 100 rooms in 100 different moods. His weight fell heavier on his right foot than his left. His hands hung a fraction too loose at his sides. His eyes, when they lifted to sweep the assembled chosen, were not the eyes she knew. They were the eyes of a man looking at furniture. I name, he said, and his voice carried through the cathedral like a bell struck underwater, muffled and far. Verlaine of House Ormsgate, let the binding be made. The cathedral erupted. Horns cracked open above the gallery. Warlords struck their spears against the stone. The chosen families wept with joy, and the lesser houses howled their approval, and somewhere in the crush of the crowd, a child began to laugh with pure delight, because this was what a kingdom was supposed to look like when it finally settled its future. And Marith Vale felt something inside her come apart, in a way she would never quite be able to name afterward. The mark on her shoulder burst into fire. She clapped her hand over it and bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste blood, because if she made a sound now, they would find her. They would drag her out, and she would not give him the gift of that final humiliation. Through a film of tears, she saw Kaelin take Verlaine's veiled hand. She saw him lift it to his lips in the old gesture of acceptance. She saw Verlaine's smile curve beneath the silver gauze, triumphant and certain, and she saw the man she loved give nothing back. Not a flicker, not a fraction. As though the hand in his were the hilt of a sword he had been told to hold. He did not look toward the gallery. He did not hesitate. He did not seem to remember that she existed at all. A sound tore out of her, a small broken thing, and it was swallowed whole by the noise of the crowd. She stumbled backward into the colonnade, her shoulder striking stone, her boot skidding on a patch of dripped wax. She kept moving. She did not know where she was going, only that she had to be gone. She had to be out of this place. She had to be anywhere but inside the cathedral where her entire world had just been set on fire in front of strangers. The servant's stair spiraled down through the belly of the cathedral, and she ran it blind, one hand clamped to her burning mark, the other cradled against the flat of her stomach, against the two small beating hearts that were, somehow, still there, still hers, still alive, even as the life she had been building in her head collapsed into ash. His children, growing in her, while he gave his name to another woman. She reached the little room behind the kitchens and threw her few belongings into a linen satchel with hands that would not stop shaking. 2 wool dresses, her mother's copper ring, a bundle of dried yarrow and motherwort she had been hoarding for the sickness she knew was coming. She paused at the narrow window and looked out over the lower terraces, where bonfires were already being lit to celebrate the new queen. Somewhere in the cathedral, Verlaine was being draped in the ceremonial silver. Somewhere, the elders were opening the oldest wine in the cellars. Somewhere, Kaelin was receiving the bows of men who had spent their lives waiting for this night. And no one, not one soul in the whole of the 4 rivers, knew that the true mate of the Alpha King was about to disappear into the winter, with his unborn children beating beneath her ribs. Marith pressed her fingers to her mouth, then to the cold pane of the window. "Be happy, my heart," she whispered, and the words came out steadier than she felt. "Be happy with her, since you chose her." Then she pulled her cloak up over her hair, slipped out through the kitchen yard, and was gone into the snow before the horns had finished sounding. She did not see the tall shadow that stepped to the high gallery rail a moment later. She did not see the way its hands closed around the stone hard enough to crack it. She did not hear, some leagues out into the dark, the single howl that rose from the cathedral roof, a sound so raw and so wrong that dogs in distant villages sat up in their sleep and whined. By the time Kaylin Draith reached the little room behind the kitchens, the candle in her window had already gone out. The snow took her in like a mother taking back a child. Meredith did not remember the first hour of walking. She only remembered how the cold crept in at the edges of her cloak, how the wet of her own tears froze on her cheeks, and then broke loose in small flakes when she turned her face into the wind. She remembered the shape of her own breath in front of her, white and ragged. She remembered the way her boots sank deeper with every step until she was pushing through drifts up to her knees. She did not stop. She did not dare. The road behind her was the road back to him, and the road back to him was the road back to watching another woman take his arm. An old woodcutter found her at dawn, sitting with her back against a frozen cart on the edge of a trade road she could not name. Her lips were blue. Her hands had gone past hurting. He lifted her onto his mule without a question, as if women with hollow eyes and two hearts beating inside them were a thing he had seen before, and he took her to the next way station and paid for a bed for her with his own coin. When she woke, she lied for the first time in her life. Her name, she told the way station keeper, was Isolde Fenn. Her husband, she said, had died of the cough 6 weeks past. She was going north, she said, to a sister she had not seen since girlhood, in a village at the foot of the Grey Stair Hills where no one would know her and no one would ask. The keeper looked at her belly, already showing under the cloak, and nodded, and asked her nothing more. Small kindnesses, in small rooms, from strangers who knew grief when they saw it. Meredith walked on. She walked north for 11 days. She ate when food was given and slept in haylofts when barns were open to her. The mark on her shoulder burned every hour of every day, and it did not fade, and she did not understand why, because she had been raised on the old stories and the old stories were clear. A bond refused was a bond unmade. The mark was supposed to wither the moment he gave his name to another. It was supposed to leave her skin the way frost leaves glass when a fire is lit. Instead, it seared in her like a brand that had never quite cooled, and some nights, in the black hour before sleep took her, she could have sworn she felt something on the other end of it. A pressure, a searching, a hand groping blind across a dark room. She told herself it was grief. Grief, she had heard, did strange things to the body. Grief could make a woman feel ghosts in her own skin. She did not allow herself to believe anything else, because hope in her condition was not a comfort. It was a wound. On the 12th morning, the land flattened into low pine country, and the road opened onto a valley she had never seen before. At the mouth of the valley sat a village, small and gray and half swallowed by the woods, and a weather-worn signpost at the crossroads named it in old lettering. Hollowmere. She walked into it with her satchel in one hand and her other hand over her stomach, and she asked the first woman she saw if there was anyone in the village who might know a little about healing, because she had learned the craft as a girl, and she was looking for work. The woman, who was broad and kind and missing 2 fingers on her left hand, looked her up and down, and then nodded toward a bent cottage at the edge of the trees. "The old healer passed in the autumn," she said. "We have no one. If you know your herbs, girl, you will not go hungry here." That was how Meredith Vale, who had once been the secret love of the Alpha King of the 4 Rivers, became Isolde Fenn, the young widow who lived at the edge of the pine woods and knew which leaf to steep for fever. She did not yet know how the village would save her life. She did not yet know that, 800 leagues to the south, the man whose face she could not stop seeing was standing at the empty window of the little room behind the kitchens, turning her forgotten copper ring over and over between 2 fingers, and learning, for the first time in his 30 years, what it felt like to want to tear his own chest open with his hands. Spring came late to Hollowmere, and then it came all at once. By the time the snow melted off the low pine branches and the first green spears of wild garlic pushed up through the black forest floor, Meredith had lived in the bent cottage at the edge of the woods for nearly 7 months. She had patched the roof herself with the blacksmith's help. She had cleared out the old healer's shelves and found among the jars and bundles a dozen small treasures, bitter root and silver leaf, and a rare dried bloom she could not name that smelled faintly of smoke when crushed. She had set up a drying rack in the low rafters and hung it heavy with her own gatherings. The village, cautious at first, had come to her door one by one. A child with a burned hand, a goat farmer with a bad tooth, an old woman whose lungs rattled every winter. They had come, and they had been helped, and they had gone away quieter than when they arrived. No one in Hollowmere called her Marith. No one knew to. To the butcher she was Isolde. To the children she was the herb woman. To the young priest at the little chapel, she was simply the healer, and he crossed himself whenever he passed her cottage. Though not, she thought, out of fear. Out of something closer to gratitude. The babies had been born in the hour before dawn on the first day of thaw. She had labored alone for most of the night, biting down on a length of twisted linen, because the village midwife had been 2 valleys away at the birth of a farmer's 4th child, and there had been no time to send for anyone else. She had done it the way women in the old tales did it, gripping the wooden post at the foot of her bed, breathing the way her grandmother had once shown her, and when the first cry split the cottage air, she had fallen back against the pillows and laughed through her tears, because she had been certain that she would die there alone in the dark, and her children would die with her. But they had not died. Neither of them. The boy came first. Dark-haired, dark-eyed, already quiet in the way his father had been quiet, as if listening to something the rest of the world had missed. She named him Torin, because the word in the old tongue meant thaw, and he had been born on the morning the ice let go. The girl came after, gold-haired as the inside of a honeycomb, wailing with a fury that filled the whole cottage, and Marith laughed again as she lifted her to her breast and felt the tiny fist close on her finger with a grip that no new child should have had. She named her Ilvi, because her grandmother had been an Ilvi, and because the name meant brightness in a language nobody in Hollowmere would ever recognize. 6 months had passed since that morning. 6 months of teeth coming in too early. 6 months of her son sitting very still in the corner of the cottage and watching moths with an attention that was not a baby's attention. 6 months of her daughter learning to pull herself up on the legs of the kitchen table at an age when other children were still rolling over and laughing, always laughing, as if the world was a joke only she understood. They were not ordinary children. Marith had known it the first time Ilvi had made a candle flame flicker by, reaching toward it with her small fat hand, and she had known it again the first time Torin had stared at a cut on her palm until the bleeding slowed on its own. She did not speak of these things. Not to the village, not even to herself, not aloud. She only held them both a little tighter at night, and she sang to them in the dark, and she prayed to whatever old gods the valley still believed in that no word of her babies would ever travel south. The mark on her shoulder had not stopped burning, not in all these months, not for an hour. Some nights, when the wind blew from the south, she would press her palm flat to the back of her shoulder, and she would feel something answer through her skin, a warmth, a pulse, a searching. It came and went. It grew stronger at dusk and weaker at dawn. She had given up trying to understand it. She had given up, too, trying to convince herself it was only grief, because grief, she had come to learn, had an ending, and this thing had no ending at all. On the morning the news came, she was in the garden at the side of the cottage, kneeling in the black earth, coaxing the last of the winter kale out of its beds. Ilvi sat on a folded blanket a few paces away, chewing on a wooden spoon with great seriousness. Torin, who preferred to be carried, was in a sling against her chest, watching her hands the way he always watched her hands, as if he were memorizing something. A shadow fell across the bed of kale. Marith looked up. It was Brenna Holt, the blacksmith's eldest daughter, a girl of perhaps 14, whose face was always pink from the forge and always laughing. This morning her face was pink for a different reason. She was out of breath, and her eyes were very wide, and she held her skirts in both fists as if she had forgotten how to let them go. "Mistress Isolde," the girl said, and her voice came out in a rush. "There is a traveler. A traveler in the square. He came in with the mule train from the southern road this morning, and he has news, and the whole village is gathered to hear him. And my mother said I was to come fetch you because she said you would want to hear it yourself," she said. Marith's hand stilled on the stem of the kale. "News of what, child?" Brenna's mouth worked for a second, as if the words did not quite want to come out. "The Alpha King," she said. "The Alpha King of the Four Rivers. He is coming north." The little wooden spoon slipped out of Ilvi's hand and fell silently onto the blanket. And at the hollow of Marith's shoulder, beneath her plain linen shift, the mark that had burned quietly since the winter suddenly blazed so hot she had to brace one hand against the earth to keep from falling forward. Torin, silent in his sling, lifted his dark head and looked toward the south. Marith rose slowly from the bed of kale. Her knees felt wrong beneath her, as if the earth had gone soft in some place she could not see. She shifted Torin higher against her chest, and he made a small sound against her collarbone. Not a cry, just a soft note of awareness, like a creature marking something new in the shape of the air. Ilvi, on the blanket, had picked up her wooden spoon again and was watching her mother with eyes that were, in that moment, far too steady for a child of 6 months. "Tell me exactly what the traveler said," Marith asked, and she was proud of her voice. It came out even. It came out like the voice of a woman who had heard a piece of weather. Nothing more. Brenna swallowed. "He said the Alpha King has left Caerwith. He said the king has been riding north for more than 3 weeks with an honor guard and with the new queen beside him. He said they are making a great progress through the valleys to show the people their new royal house, and they will pass within a half-day's ride of Hollowmere before the next full moon." Marith's heart did something that felt less like a beat and more like a stumble. The new queen, beside him, making a progress, smiling at the crowds, riding at his side across the valleys with her copper hair loose down her back. He had not torn his kingdom apart looking for her. He had not gone mad in her absence. He had not spent the winter howling at empty corridors and calling her name into the dark. He had done the sensible thing, the king's thing, the thing any man of his station would have done. He had mourned, perhaps, for a night. And then he had put on his silver crown, and he had taken his chosen queen, and he had gotten on with the business of ruling. Of course he had. She felt a small bitter laugh rise in her throat and forced it down. "Did the traveler say why he is coming north?" she asked. "He said it is for the oath-taking. All the chieftains of the northern valleys are to gather at the great stone circle at Thornbeck in a fortnight. They are to swear fealty to the new queen. It is the old custom, my father says. Every new royal house must ride to the far borders and be seen. Every new royal house." Marith drew a slow breath through her nose and held it. She had known, of course, that a binding made in a cathedral full of witnesses was a binding that would not be unmade. She had known it when she packed her satchel. She had known it when she buried her old name in the snow. But knowing a thing and hearing a thing are two different things. And this was the hearing. This was the moment her heart had been bracing for all winter, and it had come on a Tuesday, in a kale bed, with a 14-year-old blacksmith's daughter as its messenger. He was married, truly married. The queen was at his side, and he was riding north with her, and the kingdom was whole again. Then why, she thought with a slow, cold sinking in her stomach, is the mark on my shoulder still burning? "Thank you, Brenna," she said, and she smiled the small, tired smile she had perfected over the winter, the smile of a widow whose heart had already been broken once and who had no more fresh cracks to offer. "Tell your mother I am grateful. Tell her I will come to the square later, when I have put the children down for their nap." Brenna bobbed her head and was gone at a run, her skirts flying. Marith stood in the garden for a long time after the girl had disappeared. The wind moved through the pines at the edge of the clearing, Somewhere deep in the woods, a woodpecker struck a hollow tree, and the sound carried farther than it should have, and then stopped. She went inside. She laid Torin in his wooden cradle, and Ylvi in hers, and she sank down on the edge of her bed and pressed both her hands over her face. He had moved on. She had not expected it to hurt more than the first night. She had not expected, after a year of rebuilding every private corner of her life without him in it, that a piece of news carried by a mule train could cut her as deeply as the moment in the cathedral had cut her. But it did. It cut her cleaner, actually, because the moment in the cathedral had carried a terrible ambiguity. A sliver of you must be wrong, he would never, and there must be something you do not see. And this news cut that sliver away. It told her, plainly, that there was nothing she had not seen. He had chosen a queen. He had taken her. He was happy. Or he was making himself happy. Or he was at least content enough to smile for crowds and ride through valleys. And the part of her that had still, in some small, stubborn corner, been waiting for him to come back was given, on this gray spring morning, permission to die. She wept for a little while into her palms. Then she wiped her face on her apron, and she sat up very straight. And she told herself that she would not weep again. She would not. And yet, the mark burned. And yet, beneath the burn, there was that warmth, that searching pressure, the thing that had never stopped whispering through the back of her shoulder like a hand groping in the dark. It made no sense. It made less sense than ever. If he was whole, if he was wed, if he was content, then by every old law of her people the bond should have cooled in her months ago. It should not have grown louder when she heard his horses were coming. She pushed the thought away. She had pushed it away 100 times over the winter, and she would push it away 100 more. She busied herself with the rest of the afternoon. She ground bitter root in the stone mortar until her shoulders ached. She changed the linen under Ylvi's cradle and hung a fresh bundle of dried motherwort in the window and fed the chickens in their little pen behind the cottage. She was kneeling by the woodpile, splitting kindling, when the pair of shadows moved along the tree line. She saw them only because Torin, from his sling against her chest, made a small wordless sound and turned his dark head toward the forest. She looked up. 2 horses stood at the edge of the pines. Not workhorses, not the shaggy little mountain ponies of Hollowmere. Tall, long-legged animals, the kind the great houses bred, with heavy saddles and oiled tack. Neither bore a rider. They stood very still in the dappled shade, their nostrils flaring, and then, as Marith watched, a 3rd horse appeared behind them, and a 4th, and she could no longer see where the line ended. A man stepped out of the trees. He was tall. He was dressed in travel leathers, plain enough at first glance, but the hilt of the knife at his belt was silver, and the cloak pin at his throat bore a stamped sigil she could make out even at this distance. A running hound, curled around a crescent, the sigil of the Draith household guard. Marith's breath caught in her chest so sharply she felt Torin startle. The man had not seen her yet. He was turned half away, speaking to someone behind him in the trees. His face was in profile, and it was a face she did not know. Older, weathered, silver at the temple of the dark hair. He was not Kaelin. He was not any of the 3 young captains she had glimpsed in the corridors of Caerwith. He was someone else entirely, someone senior. Someone she should not be seeing at the edge of her forest on a Tuesday afternoon in a village no map of the 4 rivers had ever bothered to name. She did not move. She did not breathe. She willed Torin, in his sling, to be still, and somehow, in the way he sometimes knew things he should not have been able to know, he was. The man in travel leathers turned further, and Marith saw his face in full. His eyes found her across the clearing. They were dark, and they were steady, and they widened, once, very slightly, the way the eyes of a man widen when he has been searching for something for a long time and has only just realized he is looking at it. Then he did something she did not expect. He dropped slowly, deliberately, to one knee in the loam at the edge of the trees. He bowed his head, and he placed the flat of his right hand over his heart, in the old gesture, the one a sworn wolf made only to his true sovereign, and he held it there. Marith felt the ground tilt under her. She did not know this man. She had never spoken a word to him in her life, and he was kneeling to her in the mud at the edge of her woodpile, with a company of riders behind him in the trees, on a morning when she had just been told that her Alpha King was riding north with another woman at his side. The children in her arms and her cradle were suddenly the loudest thing in the world. The second heartbeat in her chest, the tiny one, twin to the tiny one in the cottage, was suddenly pounding in her ears. Behind the kneeling man, somewhere deeper in the trees, a twig cracked. The horses shifted. A second figure stepped into the dappled light. This one she knew. Not his face. Not his name. But the shape of him, the way the light caught in his eyes, the slow, careful way he moved, as if he were a man who had been holding something in his chest for a long time and was afraid to set it down. He had Kaelin's bones in his face. He was not Kaelin. He was younger, rougher, gentler around the mouth, and the scar that ran from the corner of his eye down to his jaw was a scar she had never seen on the man she loved. But he was Draith blood. She would have known that jaw anywhere. She had traced it with her fingertips in the dark too many times not to know it. He looked at her across the clearing. He looked at the sling against her chest. He looked at the cottage behind her, where, through the open door, the soft wail of a waking baby had just begun to rise, and the blood went out of his face. "Mother of all wolves," he said, very quietly, to the man kneeling in the loam. "Brenneth. There are two of them." Marith could not move. The younger man stood at the edge of the pines, one hand braced against the trunk of a tree as if he needed it to keep upright, and he was staring at her the way a man stares at a thing he has spent a long time refusing to imagine. His face was gone white under the traveler's dust. His throat worked once, twice, as if he were trying to swallow and could not quite remember how. The kneeling one, Brenneth, rose slowly from the loam. He did not approach. He held both hands open at his sides, the old gesture of a man offering himself unarmed, and when he spoke, his voice was careful. The careful voice of a man walking across thawing ice. "My lady," he said, "I am Brenneth of the Iron Watch, second to the Alpha King. This is Eric, his younger brother. We have been searching for you since the first snow. I know how this must look. I know how little you owe any of us after what was done to you in Caerwith. I will not come a step closer than you allow. But please, please hear me for the length of one honest conversation." Marith's hand tightened around the handle of the kindling axe without her deciding to tighten it. "You have the wrong woman," she said. The lie came out thin. "My name is Isolde. My husband is dead of the cough. I am nothing to a king." Brenneth did not argue. He only looked at her. Not at her face, not exactly. At the hollow of her shoulder, where the linen of her shift hung loose and her collarbone showed, and where, beneath the cloth, the mark was burning so fiercely now that she could feel it beating like a second pulse. "Your mark has been awake since the winter, my lady," he said quietly. "Mine was too, when my own mate was taken from me many years ago. I know the look of a woman who walks around with a fire under her skin. And I know the look of a woman who has been telling herself it is grief because she cannot bear the other names for it." Marith's eyes stung. She hated him for it. Eric, the younger brother, finally let go of the tree. He took one step forward, and then another, and he did not stop until he was 20 paces away from her, and he could look into the sling against her chest. Torin lifted his small head and regarded the strange man with the calm, dark gaze that was not a baby's gaze, and Eric made a soft sound, almost a laugh, almost a sob. "He has our grandfather's eyes," he said. "Brenneth. He has the old king's eyes. Look at him." "I see him," Brenneth said. "There are two of them, Brenneth. He does not know. He does not know there are two of them. I know, said Brenneth. Marith stepped back from them. The woodpile was at her heel, and the cottage door was 8 paces behind her, and she was calculating whether she could reach the cradle and bolt the door and throw her body between her children and the world before either of these 2 men crossed the clearing, when Eric lifted both his hands again, palms out, slow and patient. I am not here to take them from you, he said. My brother does not know we are here. My brother does not know you are alive. My brother. And his voice cracked on the word, and he did not try to hide the crack. My brother thinks you walked into a blizzard the night of the binding, and he thinks he buried you in his own head on the road to Hollowmere, except he does not know that was where you went, because no one knew. We are here because Brenneth refused to let go. We are here because Brenneth has been tracing every thread of rumor from Caerwith North for over a year, and one of those threads led to this valley. And here we are, and here you are. And my lady, I am begging you to sit down with us for 1 hour before he rides past this valley in 2 weeks, at the head of a royal progress with a woman at his side who is not his wife. Marith went very still. What? She said. Did you say? Which part? Said Eric, with a laugh that had no joy in it. Would you like me to say again, my lady? The last part. Brenneth drew a breath. He looked at his prince, and his prince nodded, and Brenneth turned back to Marith and spoke with the deliberate weight of a man laying down a very heavy stone. The woman who stands beside my king on that road, he said, is not his wife. She is not his mate. She is not his queen in any way that matters to the soul of a wolf. The binding in the Cathedral of Caerwith was not a binding, it was a performance. My king has not spoken to Verlaine of House Ormsgate in any true sense since the night it happened, and he has not set a hand on her, not once, and he has not slept a full night, not once, and the reason he rides with her on that progress is because if he does not, the 4 great houses of the east will rise against him before the summer ends, and the valleys will burn. Marith's mouth had gone dry. The traveler in the square, she said the kingdom was whole. The kingdom looks whole, Brenneth said. A careful hand has made it look whole. My king has walked through the days since the binding the way a man walks through a room in the dark with his arms stretched out in front of him. He smiles when the crowds need him to smile. He raises his cup at the feasts. He rides with her through the valleys because the valleys must see a royal house. And then at night, he goes into his private rooms, and he shuts the door. And my lady, I cannot tell you what he does in there, because I have been outside that door on the worst of those nights, and the sounds are not sounds I will describe to a woman with 2 small children in her arms. Eric's voice was rough. He is dying, my lady. Slowly. The bond did not break in him either. We have watched him since the winter. He eats because we put food in front of him. He sleeps because Brenneth sits with him. He rules because there is no one else to rule. He is hollow, and he has made himself believe you are dead, because the other thing, the thing where you are alive, and you chose to leave him, is a thing he cannot hold in his chest without splitting it open. He has moved on the way a man moves on from a limb that has been cut off. He has moved on because he would otherwise go feral and tear the valleys apart with his teeth. The axe fell out of Marith's hand. She did not hear it land. She stood in her kale garden with the sling warm against her chest and the sun thin on her face, and she felt, very distantly, a great slow collapse happening inside her, like snow sliding off a roof in one huge quiet sheet. He had not moved on. He had not. Not truly. He had put a lid over the fire, and he had walked around with the lid held shut, and he had called it moving on because there was no other name he could bear to give it. And she had been up here in Hollowmere learning to hate him for it. Her hand went, without her asking it to the back of her shoulder, to the mark. It was steady now. Not cooler. Steady. As if it had found what it was looking for and had settled, at last, into the rhythm it had been reaching for all winter. Why now? She whispered. Why are you here now? Why not a month ago? Why not 6 months ago? Why today? Brenneth's eyes were dark and sad. Because the progress rides past Holomere in 2 weeks, my lady, he said, and because if he sees you by accident, if he sees you in a crowd in a square, with those children in your arms, with no one having prepared him, with Verlaine of House Ormsgate at his side, and 100 witnesses watching, I do not know what he will do. I do not know if any of us will survive it. He has been holding himself together with wire and willpower for over a year, and the sight of you, my lady, the sight of those babies, will cut every wire at once. He looked down at his hands. I came here to ask you, he said, if you would let us bring him to you first, quietly, without the progress, without Verlaine, without 1,000 eyes, to give him back what was stolen from him, and to give you, if you will have it, the truth of what happened in the cathedral that night. Because, my lady, it is not the truth you think it is. Marith's hand closed on the sling against her chest. Torin, inside it, reached up with one small, perfect hand and closed his fist around her index finger. He did not cry. He did not make a sound. He only held her finger, steady as a grown man holding a rope, and he looked up at her with her lover's eyes, and she understood in some part of herself older than thought that her son was telling her that it was all right, that she could listen, that the world was not about to end just because 2 strangers had walked out of the trees. From inside the cottage, Ylvi began to wail. She had woken from her nap. She wanted her mother. Marith looked at the 2 men standing 20 paces from her in the dappled spring light. 1 hour, she said. You will sit at my kitchen table. You will not touch the children. You will tell me everything. And then, when you are finished, I will tell you what I will and will not allow. Brenneth of the Iron Watch bowed his silvering head. Thank you, my lady, he said. We are yours to command. They sat around the small pine table in the cottage, and Marith poured them each a cup of nettle tea with a steady hand. She did not quite feel belonged to her. Ylvi, retrieved from her cradle, sat in her mother's lap and regarded the 2 strange men with a grave, unblinking interest, as if they were a new and mildly puzzling kind of weather. Torin, still in the sling, had fallen asleep against Marith's chest. One small fist curled against her collarbone, directly over the mark. She was aware of him as one is aware of one's own heartbeat, constantly and not quite consciously. Begin, she said. At the beginning, the true beginning, and do not spare me. Brenneth placed both of his hands flat on the table. He did not touch his tea. The beginning is 3 nights before the binding, he said. It is the night of the small council supper in the private hall above the eastern cloisters. My king ate the fish, as he always did. He drank 1 cup of the white wine, as he always did. And at the end of the supper, the steward poured him a 2nd cup of something the steward said had been gifted to him from the cellars of House Ormsgate. My king drank half of it before he noticed the aftertaste, and by the time he set it down, the wolf in him was already gone. Marith went very still. Gone, she repeated. Not dead, said Eric low, muzzled, silenced. There is a compound, old and rare and deeply forbidden, that will put a wolf to sleep inside a man for 3 to 5 days. It leaves the man walking. It leaves the man eating and speaking and smiling at counselors and signing parchment and wearing his crown. It leaves his face. It takes everything else. My brother, for the 3 days before the binding and the full day of the ceremony, was a man in a man's clothing. His wolf could not reach him. His bond to you could not reach him. His own memories of you were smothered under a weight he could not name. He did not know he had been drugged. He thought he had simply gone strangely numb. He thought, my lady, that he had fallen out of love with you, and he was terrified, and he did not know what to do about it, And then they put him in front of the cathedral, and the elders spoke, and the chosen came up the aisle, and he did the thing a king is supposed to do when he cannot feel his own heart. He named a queen, because naming a queen was the only thing his training knew how to do in a silence that large. The teacup in Marith's hand made a small sound against the saucer. So when he stood on the dais, she whispered, and he looked out over the cathedral, and he did not see me. He could not see you, Brenneth said. He could not feel you. If you had walked down the aisle in front of him with your face uncovered and your hand on your belly, he would have looked at you as a stranger. I was in the gallery. I saw him. I have known that man since he was a child. The thing that stood on the dais was not him. It was the shape of him. And when he woke, Marith said, when the drug wore off. What then? Eric's jaw tightened. 3 nights after the binding, he said. In the small hour before dawn, he came back into himself the way a man surfaces from drowning. He sat up in his bed, and he said your name, and then he screamed it, and he tore the hangings off the posts with his bare hands, and he went straight down the corridor to the little room behind the kitchens, and it was empty. The candle was out. The fire was cold. Your copper ring was on the pillow. He picked it up, and he sank down in the middle of the floor with it, and he did not move. My lady, he did not move, for half a day. He would not speak. He would not eat. Brenneth finally got him up on his feet, and the first thing he did was send riders. Every road out of Caerwith, every port, every valley. We had men searching for over a year. We found nothing. There was a rumor once, in midwinter, of a pregnant widow who had taken the North Road, but the trail went cold in a snowstorm outside Greystair and we lost it. Everything else was dust. And Verlaine, Marith said. Verlaine, said Brenneth, and his voice was suddenly very flat, has been confined to her own apartment since the morning after the binding. My king has not seen her alone since. She does not share his table. She does not share his rooms. She rides with him on the progress because the valleys must see a queen. She is under guard day and night. We have not yet proved, to the standard the elder council demands, that the white wine came from her family, but we know. And she knows, we know. She has been very quiet this winter, for a woman who was supposed to be a bride. She is not the only one, Eric said. Her house. Her uncle. The whole Ormsgate line. They have been playing a very long game, my lady. The binding was never meant to be the end of it. The binding was meant to be the beginning. With you gone, with my brother yoked to their daughter by a witnessed oath, they were going to begin the slow, quiet work of making themselves the true power behind the throne. They almost succeeded. They will still succeed, if we do not stop them before the progress reaches Thornbeck. Marith looked down at Ylvi in her lap. Her daughter had laid her small gold head against Marith's breastbone and closed her eyes. Torrin's breath was warm and even against her collarbone. Neither child was asleep, she realized. They were listening, both of them. In the strange, still, watchful way that was not a baby's way, they were listening to every word. She thought of the night in the cathedral. She thought of the long months of winter. She thought of the morning this morning, of the moment Brenna Holt had come running through her gate and told her that the Alpha King was riding north with another woman at his side, and of the small, savage private things she had thought in the kale bed afterward. He has moved on. He has moved on, and I am a ghost in his life now, and I will teach myself to be grateful for the quiet. He had not moved on. He had been drowning in a locked room, and he had held the door shut from the inside so that the kingdom would not see. She felt the tears come, and she did not try to stop them. They slid down her face in silence and landed in her daughter's gold hair and were lost there. All right, she said. All right. Bring him to me. Brenneth closed his eyes for a single long breath. When he opened them, there was a wet brightness in them he did not bother to hide. Thank you, my lady, he said. Not here, Marith said. Not in the cottage. Not where the children are. There is a ruin, A stone circle, a day's ride east of Hollowmere, in the old wolf forest where the villagers no longer go. Bring him there, at dusk, 3 nights from now. Alone. No guard. No brother. No second. Just him. If he is the man you say he will come alone, and he will come in peace, and we will speak. If he is not the man you say he is, I will know it the moment he steps into the circle, and I will leave. And you will never find me again. Those are my terms. Those are fair terms, Brenneth said. They are generous terms, Eric said, more generous than my brother deserves. They are the only terms I have, said Marith. She looked at both of them across the pine table, and her voice, when it came, was low and very level. And hear me now. If you have lied to me, if any part of what you have told me this afternoon is a thing your house has invented to lure me out of this valley, if there is any scheme in this, any ambush, any second net behind the first one, then I will take my children north into country that has no name, and I will disappear into it, and no wolf of the 4 rivers will ever find us again, and your king will die of it, Eric Draith, because I will not be found twice. Eric met her eyes. He did not flinch. There is no lie, my lady, he said. Then you have 3 nights, said Marith Vale, to bring him to me. She did not see it, because she was looking at the brothers across the table, but at the hem of her sleeve, where her son's small hand had come loose from the sling and now rested against the raw wood of the table, a pale gold light was curling briefly around his fingertips. The faintest suggestion of flame. No heat, no harm. Only a small, patient glow, like an ember answering a distant fire. Torrin Vale, 6 months old, had opened his dark eyes. He was looking south. And in the palace of Caerwith, 800 leagues away, the Alpha King of the 4 rivers, who had not wept since the morning he had picked up a copper ring from an empty pillow, lifted his face from a map he had not been reading and pressed both of his hands flat to his own chest, because something, somewhere, had just knocked quietly against the inside of his ribs. Something that had been silent since the winter. Something that was still alive. 3 nights later, Marith Vale walked into the old stone circle in the wolf forest, with her cloak pulled tight and her hair bound back, and she walked in alone. The circle was older than any kingdom that had ever named the valley. 7 standing stones, gray as bone, leaned in toward a flat altar at the center that had cracked down its middle in some winter no man alive remembered. Moss had eaten the carvings on the stones. Birch saplings had grown up inside the ring and then been cut down and grown again. It was a place the villagers of Hollowmere did not go, and it was the place Marith had chosen, because she wanted to speak with him on ground that belonged to neither of them. The children were with Brenna Holt, in the blacksmith's kitchen, with 3 older women and a bolted door, and a promise of honey bread for every hour they stayed quiet. Marith had kissed each small forehead, and she had walked out of her cottage without looking back, because if she had looked back, she would not have come. She reached the circle before the sun set. She had wanted to. She stood at the altar stone with her hands flat on its cold face, and she waited. The forest went quiet the way a forest goes quiet when a predator enters it. The last birdsong died off in the high branches. A hair broke from the undergrowth on her left and vanished into the ferns on her right without a sound. The light through the trees turned the color of a bruise. Then she heard him. He came in on foot. She had not expected that. She had expected hoofbeats, or the rush of a wolf through the deadfall. Instead, there were simply footsteps in the loam, human footsteps, unhurried and even, and she turned from the altar and saw him step between 2 of the standing stones and stop. He did not speak. For a long moment he did not speak. He only stood there in the thin evening light with his hands open at his sides, and he looked at her. And Marith saw, in the first breath of that looking, that everything Brenneth and Eric had told her in the cottage had been true. Caelan Draith had been dying. His face was thinner. Not thin. Thinner. the thinness of a man who had been chewing himself from the inside for over a year. There was a new streak of silver at his left temple that had not been there the winter before. His mouth, which she remembered as a steady, unhurried mouth, had a crack in its lower lip, where he had been biting it in some private hour. His dark hair was longer, pushed back behind his ears, and his eyes, those amber eyes she had loved in the snow, were not flat anymore. They were not hollow. They were enormous. They were the eyes of a man who has just walked out of a burning building and seen his house still standing at the top of the hill. "Marith," he said. The word came out broken. "Kaelin." She had meant her voice to be cold. She had rehearsed it cold all the way through the forest. Instead, her voice came out the way his had come out, broken and soft and used. He took a step into the circle. She lifted her hand, palm out. He stopped. "You will stay where you are," she said, "until I say otherwise." "Yes," he said at once. "Yes, as long as you want, as long as you need." He sank slowly down onto one knee in the moss, just inside the line of the stones, and he put both his hands flat on his thighs, the old posture of a wolf who has come unarmed to another wolf's ground. He bent his head. And then he drew one long, shuddering breath, and when he lifted his eyes again, they were wet. "I thought you were dead," he said. "I thought I had killed you. I have thought it every morning since the winter. Brenneth told me 3 nights ago that you were alive, and I did not believe him. I called him a liar. I told him to get out of my sight. And then I rode here because he would not stop looking at me, and because the thing inside me that has been dead since the winter moved, Marith. It moved in my chest 3 nights ago, when the sun was going down, and I did not know why until now." Marith pressed her palms harder against the altar stone behind her. It was the only thing keeping her upright. "You named her," she said. Her voice cracked. "You named her in the cathedral, in front of every soul in the 4 rivers. You did not look for me. You did not hesitate. You took her hand and you lifted it to your mouth." "I do not remember doing it." "That is not good enough." "No, it is not. Nothing I can say is good enough." He drew a breath that caught twice on the way in. "Marith, Brenneth told you what was done. I know he told you. I will not insult you by repeating it. I will only say this. I did not choose her. I did not know I was choosing anything. A kinder man than I am would have died rather than let that happen. I am not a kinder man. I am the man who drank from the cup and stood on the dais and said her name. And I am the man who woke 3 nights later with your name in my mouth and nothing else in the world. And I have been the man who walked through a year of his own days, holding himself together with wire. Because if I had let go, Marith, if I had let the thing inside me off the wire even for 1 night, I would have pulled my own kingdom down on top of my head trying to find you." He lowered his head again. "I moved on," he said, and the word was a knife in his own mouth. "Do you understand me? I made myself believe you were dead. I buried you. I buried you every night in my own head because it was the only way I could get up in the morning and ride at the head of a progress with a woman who is not my wife. I walked out into crowds and I smiled. I raised my cup at a dozen feasts. I did not know. I did not know you were in a cottage in Hollowmere with a garden and a goat pen and a cradle. I did not know you were alive. I did not know, Marith, that there were." His voice broke. "That there were children." The word hung in the cold air of the stone circle. Marith's hand went, unthinking, to her lower belly, and then remembered. There was no belly to hold now. There were 2 warm, small sleeping weights a league away in a blacksmith's kitchen. 2, she said. He made a sound. It was not a word. "A boy," she said. "And a girl. He is dark, like you. She is gold. They were born on the first day of the thaw. He is quiet, and he watches everything. She laughs at things that are not funny. She can make a candle flame bend toward her hand when she is hungry. He can slow a cut from bleeding if he stares at it long enough. They are 6 months old, Kaelin. They do not know your name. They do not know you exist. I did not tell them. I could not. I could not say their father's name out loud in my own house without coming apart, and so they have a mother, and they have a valley, and they have a chicken coop, and they have no father, because their father was a man in a cathedral who did not look for me in the gallery. She was crying now. She had not meant to. She was crying, and she was angry about the crying, and underneath the anger there was an enormous slow relief that was worse than any of it, because the part of her that had been at war with the part of her that still loved him was laying down its weapons in the moss, and she was not ready. She was not ready for it to be over. She needed to stay angry for longer. She had earned longer. Kaelin was no longer kneeling. He was on his hands in the loam, head down, shoulders shaking, and he was weeping the way a man weeps who has not allowed himself to weep for a very long time and has finally been given permission. "I am sorry," he said into the moss. "I am so sorry. I am sorry. Marith, I am sorry." Between the stones on the north side of the circle there was a sudden small wrong sound, a twig, then a second twig, then a soft, careful breath, the breath of someone who had been holding it for too long and had just slipped. Marith's head came up. Kaelin's did too. He had come alone. That had been the term. He had come alone. He had ridden alone. And Marith had watched the forest edge for an hour before the sun set, and she had seen no rider but him. Then who? A figure stepped between the northern stones, and the dying light caught on the hilt of a long, thin blade, and Marith saw the hooded cloak, the gloved hand, the poisoned edge of the steel, and she saw the figure's other hand come up with a small crossbow already drawn. The bolt was not pointed at Kaelin. It was pointed at her. The hooded figure spoke, and the voice beneath the hood was a woman's voice, bright and steady and almost amused. "Forgive the intrusion, my king," said Verlaine of House Ormsgate. "I am afraid I did not quite believe my husband when he said he was going riding alone." Kaelin moved before Marith's mind could catch the shape of what was happening. He was on his feet, between her and the crossbow, before the word alone had finished leaving Verlaine's mouth. The shift rolled up the back of his shoulders in a great shudder that did not quite break into fur, a warning more than a change, the wolf rising to the skin and then holding, just barely, because some last human corner of him had decided that teeth were not yet the answer. "Put it down, Verlaine," he said. His voice was very quiet. "Put it down and walk out of this circle, and I will let you walk." "I do not think I will, my king." She did not move the bow. "I have ridden through 3 days of wet forest for this meeting. It would be a waste to leave without finishing it." "You rode alone?" said Kaelin. "I rode with my uncle's 6 best," she said. "They are in a ring around this circle at 100 paces. They have been in that ring since an hour before you arrived. They will not step in unless I tell them to step in. And they will not let a small gray healer girl run out of these trees with a child on each hip, my king. So please do not start imagining it." Marith's hand, behind her back, had closed on the edge of the altar stone. The stone was cold. The mark under her shoulder blade was not cold. It was burning now with a steady, hard heat that felt less like a wound and more like a forge, and something inside the forge was waking up. "You do not have to do this," Kaelin said. "Verlaine, listen to me. The progress is over. I will send you home tomorrow. I will not drag your family through the courts. I will let the whole affair die quietly. I swear it on my father's grave. Go home. Go back to Ormsgate. Let this end." Verlaine smiled. Marith could see the smile under the hood. It was the same smile Marith had watched on a dais in a cathedral a year and more ago, the smile of a woman who has just been given the thing she was bred to take. "My king," Verlaine said gently, "you misunderstand me. I did not ride 3 days through wet forest to go home quietly. I rode 3 days through wet forest because my uncle and I have concluded, with regret, that you are no longer going to be useful to us. A king without a true mate is a king we can yoke. A king who finds his true mate again, and finds she has given him heirs, is a king who can no longer be yoked. So, I am afraid the king will be having a hunting accident tonight, and the healer girl from Hollow Mere, and her two regrettable little wolves will unfortunately simply vanish before morning. Kaelin went very still. Her too, he repeated. Oh, said Verlaine, and her voice went small and delighted. Oh, my king, you did not know there were two yet. How awful for you to find out like this. Kaelin made a sound that was not a human sound. Verlaine's crossbow shifted a fraction, and the bolt left the string. Marith did not think. She moved. It was not a movement she knew she could make. She had been standing behind the altar stone and she was in front of Kaelin before the bolt had crossed half the circle, her arms up, her body thrown across the line of flight. Her hands splayed as if she could catch a poisoned arrow out of the air with her fingers, and in the small eternity before the bolt reached her, the mark on her shoulder blade finally, fully, woke. Light came out of her. It did not come gently. It broke out of her the way a dam breaks out of stones that have held it for too long. A great pale gold wave of it rolled down the length of her arms and out of her open palms. And the bolt hit the wave, and the bolt turned to ash in the air, and the ash drifted down through the wave and landed on the altar stone as fine, gray dust. Verlaine's mouth opened. She did not close it again for some time. Marith stood in the middle of the ring with her hand still open in front of her, and light still spilling gently from her fingertips, and she did not understand yet what had just happened. She only understood that something in her had reached out and said no, and the world had obeyed. Behind her, Kaelin whispered, "Marith, your hands." The light was not fading, it was spreading. It had pooled in her palms, and now it was climbing up her forearms and into the hollow of her throat, and, she realized with a slow, distant astonishment, into the mark on her shoulder. Her grandmother had told her once, in a whisper, that there had been healers in their line long ago, women who had never married, women who had lit candles with a look. Marith had not believed it. Her grandmother had said a great many things. Verlaine was fumbling to recock the crossbow. Her gloved hands were shaking for the first time, and Marith had the strange detached thought that a woman who had been bred from girlhood to run a kingdom had not expected a kale gardener to catch arrows in the air. "Run," Marith said to Kaelin, without turning her head. "There are 6 of them in the trees. You cannot fight 6 of them in the dark. Run, get to Brenneth, get to Eric, bring them." "I am not leaving you." "You are not leaving me. You are going to the village. There are 2 children in the village. If her 6 come to the village before you do, Kaelin, there will be nothing left to come back to. Go." For one long second, Kaelin did not move. Then, in a single savage shift, he went. The wolf that burst out of the man was black as river stone, as tall at the shoulder as a plow horse, and its eyes, when it turned them on Verlaine, were not amber anymore. They were the color of a forge. It took the distance to the northern stones in 3 bounds. It broke through Verlaine's line of guards in the dark with a sound like a thunderstorm collapsing into a thicket, and it was gone, a dark streak between the birches, running flat out for Hollowmere. Marith was alone in the circle with Verlaine of House Ormsgate. Verlaine got the crossbow cocked. She lifted it. Marith brought her hands together in front of her chest, palms touching, and the light that had pooled in them compressed into a single hard, bright knot between her palms. And when she opened her hands again, the knot leapt out across the circle and struck the crossbow, and the crossbow's bowstring parted with a dry snap, and its stock cracked in Verlaine's grip. Verlaine dropped it. She drew the long, thin blade from her belt. "You are a witch," Verlaine said. Her voice was no longer amused. "The stories were true. The old healers were witches. Your grandmother was a witch." "I have no idea what my grandmother was," said Marith. "I am only a woman whose children you meant to harm tonight." She walked out from behind the altar stone. She was not afraid. She noticed this, distantly. She should have been afraid. She had a 6-month-old boy and a 6-month-old girl a league away in a blacksmith's kitchen, and there were 6 trained killers in the forest around her, and she had no weapon but a pair of glowing hands and a mark that would not stop burning. Fear was the correct response. Instead, there was something underneath the place fear was supposed to sit, and it was an enormous, slow anger, older than her, older than the circle, old enough that it felt like it had been waiting inside her since before she had a name. Verlaine lunged. Marith met the lunge with her left hand open, and the light met the blade, and the blade melted halfway down its length and spattered in a hiss into the moss. Verlaine stared at the glowing stump of her sword. Then, from the trees, the first of her 6 guards stepped into the circle with a heavy war axe in both hands, and Marith understood that a glowing hand was not going to be enough for an axe, and that she was about to run out of this very quickly. The guard took 2 steps toward her. A horn sounded in the forest. It was not Verlaine's horn. It was a long, low, 3-note horn, the horn of a house that was not the House of Ormsgate, and it was answered, a moment later, from 3 different directions in the dark. The guard with the axe turned sharply. The second horn was Brenneth's. Brenneth and Eric came into the circle at the head of 20 riders, and behind them came more, and behind those came still more, because neither Brenneth of the Iron Watch nor Eric Draith had ever quite believed that Kaelin was going to walk into a strange stone ring alone and unwatched. And they had, it turned out, set their own quiet ring around Verlaine's ring without bothering to tell their king. Verlaine's 6 died fast. They were good. They were not 20 good. The one with the axe went down under Eric's sword before he could finish his turn, and the others were drawn one by one out of the dark by the riders and ended in the moss without ceremony. Verlaine was taken alive. That was Brenneth's choice. And it was a cold choice. And Marith did not argue with it, because there were things the old houses would need her alive to say. Marith herself sat on the altar stone with her hands in her lap and let the light drain slowly back into her skin. She was shaking, and she had not realized she was shaking. Eric came to her and put his cloak around her shoulders, and he did not say anything, which she was grateful for. Kaelin rode in from the Hollowmere Road an hour later. He had made it to the village. He had reached the blacksmith's kitchen. The children, he told her, climbing down from his horse with his hands still trembling, were fine. Brenna Holt had bolted the door. The 3 older women had ringed the cradle with iron pokers. Torin had been awake, watching the door, very calm. Ylvi had been asleep, one small fist curled in her brother's sleeve. Neither child had cried. Neither child had needed to be soothed. Kaelin had stood in the doorway of that kitchen, he said, and he had looked at his son and his daughter for the first time, and he had not trusted his own legs to carry him any closer, so he had only looked. And then he had ridden back to the circle as fast as his horse could take him. "I will go to them now," he said to Marith, "if you will allow it. Tonight. I will not touch them if you would rather I did not. I will only sit in the room. I will only look at them. I will wait outside the door if that is what you want. And I will wait outside it every night for the rest of my life if I have to." Marith looked at him for a long moment. She looked at his tired face, and at the amber of his eyes, and at the small silver streak at his temple, and at the old self-loathing that had not yet gone out of the line of his mouth. She stood up. She walked across the circle to him. She put her hand lightly against his chest, over his heart, and she felt, under her palm, the steady, familiar hammer she had not felt beneath her hand in over a year, and she closed her eyes for the space of 3 breaths, because she needed those 3 breaths to herself. Then she opened her eyes. "You will come with me to the cottage," she said. "You will come inside. You will sit by the fire. I will bring your son to you first because he has been waiting, I think. Then I will bring your daughter. You will not hold them until they reach for you. They will decide. They always decide. Do you understand me, Kaelin Draith?" "Yes," said the Alpha King of the 4 Rivers. "Yes, I understand you." They rode back to Hollowmere in the deep blue hour before true night. Eric stayed behind with the men to finish the business of the circle. Brenneth rode ahead to the village to settle the street, because a company of armed riders coming down a forest road at dusk would have frightened the valley out of its beds. Marith rode with Kaelin. He had put her up in front of him on the saddle without asking, because neither of them had the strength for the small formal courtesies, and she had allowed it, because she did not have the strength either. His arm was warm around her waist. His cheek rested against her hair. Neither of them spoke for the first half of the ride. Then he said, very low, "Tell me their names." "Torin," she said. "Ylvi." He breathed out. It was almost a laugh. "Torin," he said. "Ylvi. Torin and Ylvi of the Four Rivers, gods above." "They do not know the Four Rivers," she said. "They know Hollowmere, they know the chicken coop, they know the goat. I do not want them ripped out of that tomorrow morning, Kaelin. I do not want them paraded through any valley. They are babies. They cannot be pieces on a chessboard for your houses to push around." "They will not be pieces," he said. "I swear it on the crown." "The crown has not always been the thing you swore truest on." He was silent a long moment. Then he said, "Swear it on what then? Tell me what oath you will accept. Tell me the oldest and the coldest oath in the valley, and I will make it to you now, tonight, between these trees." Marith did not answer for a while. Then she said, "Swear it on their heads. Swear it on Torin and Ylvi." Kaelin closed his eyes. "On my son's head," he said, "and on my daughter's head, and on every day of their lives that has happened and every day that has not yet happened. I swear to you, Marith Vale, that they will not be a king's pieces. They will be a father's children. And the first man who lifts a hand to make them otherwise will answer to me with his throat." Marith did not trust herself to speak. She pulled his arm a little tighter around her waist instead, and she felt him let out a breath he had been holding for, she suspected, most of a year. The cottage was warm when they came to it. Brenna Holt had kept the fire up and then had gone home to her mother. The three older women had stayed. They rose as Marith came through the door, and they looked at the tall, tired man behind her, and one of them, the one who had been the miller's wife before she was widowed, looked at Marith once, and then looked at Kaelin once, and she set her lips together and she nodded, and she gathered the other two, and the three of them went out the back door into the night without a word. Small kindnesses, in small rooms, from strangers who knew the shape of a thing when they saw it. Marith went to the cradle. Torin was awake. His dark eyes found her the instant she leaned over him, and he reached up with his small fist, and she lifted him out of the cradle and held him against her shoulder for a long moment, breathing the warm milk smell of him before she turned. Kaelin was on the hearthrug. He had not sat on the chair. He had gone down onto the rug, on his knees, and he was holding his hands palm up on his thighs, very still, the way a man holds his hands when he is asking a wild thing to come closer. Marith carried her son across the room to his father. She knelt on the rug opposite Kaelin. She held Torin so the baby could see the man's face. Torin looked. He looked for a long time. He did not smile. He did not cry. He reached out, slow and deliberate, and he pressed his small palm flat against Kaelin's cheek, and he held it there. And then he leaned forward out of his mother's arms with absolute certainty, and Kaelin caught him as if catching him had always been what his hands were for. Torin settled against his father's chest with a small contented sigh. Kaelin bent his head over his son and he wept, silently, into the soft dark hair. Marith got up and she went back to the second cradle, and she lifted Ylvi, who had woken and was looking around the room with solemn interest, and she brought her daughter to the rug, and Ylvi took one look at her father and her brother on the floor together, and she laughed, a delighted tiny laugh, and she held out both her arms to Kaelin. He gathered her in too, a son on one arm, a daughter on the other, the alpha king of the Four Rivers on the floor of a small cottage in Hollowmere, shaking, with his two children pressed to his chest, and the mark on the back of Marith's shoulder burning so steadily now, it felt like the pilot light in an old lamp, finally settling into its proper flame. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Kaelin said, against Ylvi's small, bright head, "I have to go back." Marith looked at him. "Not tonight," he said. "Not tomorrow. But soon. Verlaine is taken, but her uncle is not. The Ormsgate houses do not yet know she has been taken. When they learn it, they will move. And what they will move against first, Marith, is everything they think is weak. That means the council at Caerwith. That means the loyal houses. That means you. And it means them." He looked down at his children. "I will not let them reach for these." "I know," she said. "Come with me." "I am not going to Caerwith tonight with a 6-month-old pair in a saddlebag, Kaelin. Not tonight. When it is safe. When it is ended. When there is no Ormsgate uncle and no Ormsgate cousin and no Ormsgate kitchen girl with a knife in her apron left in any corridor of that palace. Then I will come back for you. Myself. On foot, if I have to. And I will bring you home." She reached across the hearthrug. She laid her hand over the hand that was cradling her son. "Then go," she said. "Go and end it. And come back for us. And when you come back, Kaelin, come back alone. No progress, no banners, no horns. Just you. Walk up the path to this cottage by yourself, and I will open the door." "I will," said Kaelin Draith. "I swear it on their heads." Outside, on the ridge above Hollowmere, a single wolf lifted its face to the spring stars and began to howl, and after a moment a second wolf answered it, and then a third, and then a chorus, all the way back down the valley toward the southern road, the long, low song of a pack that had found something it had thought it had lost. Kaelin rode for Caerwith at first light. He took Eric and half the riders with him. The other half he left at Hollowmere, under Brenneth's command, scattered through the valley in small quiet pairs, shepherds and charcoal burners and a new smith's apprentice, men who would look like nothing and draw no attention, and would put themselves between Marith's cottage and the forest road the moment a wrong footstep came down it. He did not come back for 14 days. On the 15th day, news came up the southern road on the back of a wet mule, carried by a thin boy with a sealed letter in his shirt. The letter was for Brenneth. Brenneth read it standing in the middle of Marith's garden in a steady spring rain, and then he folded it and put it inside his jerkin, and he looked up at Marith with an expression she could not quite read. "What is it?" she said. "My lady," said Brenneth slowly, "the uncle has moved." The uncle, Marith had learned over the fortnight, was a man named Halvard Ormsgate, brother to Verlaine's dead father, holder of the Eastern Pass and commander of the 5,000 spears Marith had heard about in the cathedral long ago. He was, Brenneth had said, the true architect. Verlaine had been his instrument. The white wine had been his cup. The drug had been his. All these months had been his. "Moved how?" said Marith. "He has taken the stone council at Thornbeck," said Brenneth. "He rode in with 2,000 men yesterday morning before the bell, and he took the chamber before the elders could raise the old signal. He is holding the elders. He is calling every northern chieftain to Thornbeck to swear to him as regent. He is claiming my king has gone mad. He is claiming my king has abducted a healer woman from a mountain village and is keeping her by force and cannot be trusted with the crown. He is claiming my king's true queen, his niece, has been murdered, and he is demanding my king's head for it." Marith set down the basket of bitterroot she had been carrying. "Verlaine is alive," she said. "Verlaine is alive in a locked tower in Caerwith. Yes, but Halvard does not know that. Halvard believes Verlaine is dead because 3 nights ago, a man who was not one of ours rode up to the gate of Caerwith with a small box, and the small box contained a lock of red hair and a ring, and the ring was Verlaine's, and the man said the healer witch of Hollowmere had sent them as proof of her kill." "No such man rode up to my gate," said Marith. "No," said Brenneth. "He did not. Halvard sent himself that box, my lady. He is telling the story he needs the North to hear. And my king, said Marith. Her voice had gone quieter. Where is my king? He rides for Thornbeck, said Brenneth. He left Caerwith at dawn yesterday with every rider he had. He will reach Thornbeck at dusk tomorrow. He has sent word, through me, to you. He says that when the stone circle is taken, when the elders are freed, when the uncle's head is off, he will come back up this road for you and for the children, and not a day later. He says he is sorry. Marith looked past Brenneth to her cottage, where Ylvi was banging a wooden spoon on the doorframe with absolute joy, and Torin was sitting beside her, watching a beetle. She said, I am going to Thornbeck. Brenneth opened his mouth. Do not, she said. Do not argue it. Listen to me, Brenneth. The uncle is telling the North that my king is holding me against my will. The uncle is telling the North that I am a story, that I am a sick king's excuse, that I am a woman who has been invented in Kaelin's head to explain his madness. If the North believes that story for another week, the North will rise behind the uncle, and the valleys will burn whether Kaelin takes Thornbeck or not. The only way to end the uncle's story is to walk into the stone circle with my children in my arms and let the North see me. Let them see the mark on my shoulder. Let them see Kaelin's son and Kaelin's daughter. A story dies when the woman in the story walks into the room. My lady, said Brenneth, if you walk into that circle with those children, the uncle will put a blade in all three of you before the elders can draw breath. He will try, said Marith. He will not succeed. She looked down at her hands. They were steady. They had been steady for 14 days, since the night she had burned an arrow out of the air in a forest circle, and they were steadier now than they had ever been. Something woke in me in the wolf forest, she said. It has not gone back to sleep, Brenneth. I have been holding it down these 2 weeks because the cottage is small and the children are small, and I did not want to frighten them. I do not think I will need to hold it down in Thornbeck. Brenneth looked at her for a long time. Then he bowed his silvering head. Then we ride, my lady. They rode at dawn. They rode hard. Brenneth put Marith up in front of him on his own horse, and Torin in a sling against her chest, and Ylvi in a sling against her back. And he rode as if the mountains themselves were chasing him. The 6 men he chose came with them. They left Hollowmere, a quiet village under the care of 3 old women with iron pokers and a bolted door, and by the time the second dusk fell, they were at the edge of the great ridge above Thornbeck, and below them the valley was full of torches. The stone council at Thornbeck was not a single circle. It was 9. 9 rings of standing stones set in a wide flat clearing, arranged around a single great altar stone that was older than the rings, older, the old priests said, than speech. On the altar stone, as Marith watched, a tall man in the grey and gold of House Ormsgate stood in a ceremonial cloak and addressed a crowd of northern chieftains that filled the clearing from edge to edge. Halvard Ormsgate. He had a ceremonial blade in his belt. Behind him, on a raised wooden scaffold, 7 of the elders of the 4 rivers knelt with their hands bound. In the trees on the far side of the clearing, Marith could see movement. Kaelin was there. His men were there. They had reached Thornbeck. They were waiting, she saw, because to charge the clearing with the elders on the scaffold was to have the elders' throats cut before the first horse reached the altar. Kaelin was waiting because he had to wait. Halvard had built the trap exactly. Marith slid down from Brenneth's saddle. My lady, said Brenneth low. I need the children, she said. He handed them down to her, one and then the other. Torin against her chest, Ylvi against her hip. Both of them awake. Both of them looking at the torchlit clearing with the calm, unblinking attention of creatures who had decided, somewhere in the last 14 days, that none of this was particularly surprising. Marith looked down at her son. Are you ready, small heart? She whispered. Torin reached up. He put his small palm against the hollow of her throat. A small pale gold light moved from his palm into her skin. Ilvi laughed. A soft, delighted, knowing laugh. She reached up with her free hand and she put it on the other side of her mother's throat. And a second light, this one faintly silver, flowed into Marith's skin from the other side, and the two lights met in the hollow of her throat, and they wove together. And the mark on the back of her shoulder answered them. And Marith understood, in the space of a single breath, what her children were. They were not her power. They were the doubling of it. She walked down the ridge into the clearing of Thornbeck with a child on each arm, and the torches nearest her went out as she passed them, because the wind she carried with her put them out, and the chieftains in the back row turned, and the ones in front of them turned, and then a whole long ripple of turning heads ran down the clearing toward the altar, and by the time Halvard Ormsgate noticed the silence gathering at his back and turned himself, Marith Vale was standing at the foot of the altar with her two children in her arms, and her face was lit from the inside like a lantern. "Halvard of House Ormsgate," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. It carried to the back of the clearing. It carried up into the trees. "My name is Marith Vale. I am the healer of Hollowmere. I am the true mate of Caelan Draith, Alpha King of the Four Rivers. These are his son and his daughter. My king is not mad. My king is not holding me. I walked out of the south on my own feet last winter because I was lied to, and I walked back up this ridge tonight on my own feet because I am done being a story in your mouth." Halvard stared at her. He drew the blade at his belt. He took one step toward her across the altar stone. Marith did not move. She only lifted her son a little higher on her shoulder and her daughter a little tighter against her hip, and she let the light that her children had poured into her go out through the soles of her feet into the old earth under the stones. It flowed out. It flowed down. It found, underneath Thornbeck, whatever it had been looking for, and it came back up in a slow, pale gold circle that rose around the altar, and rose around the scaffold, and rose around the bound elders, and the bindings on the elders turned to ash and fell away, and the wooden scaffold itself shivered and sagged, and Halvard Ormsgate's blade, in his hand, grew slowly hot and hotter, and he dropped it with a curse, and by the time it hit the altar stone, it was glowing white. From the trees on the far side of the clearing, a single great black wolf broke cover at a full run and crossed the clearing in 6 bounds and brought Halvard Ormsgate to the ground without ever quite slowing down. The northern chieftains dropped to their knees in the grass like a wave. They carried Marith home to Caerwith at the slow pace of a family that has nothing left to prove. There was no progress this time, and no banners, and no horns. There was only Caelan walking beside her horse for long stretches of the road, one hand on her knee, his other hand on the wooden edge of the little cart where Torin and Ilvi slept in a nest of furs. There was Eric riding ahead with a small honor guard, and Brenneth riding behind with a second. There were the elders of the Four Rivers, freed of their bindings, walking the first 3 days of the road with them out of Thornbeck on their own feet, because they had decided, as a body, that the first steps of the new Queen's Road into Caerwith ought to be witnessed by the oldest voices in the valley. It took them 9 days to come down out of the north. On the 10th day, they rode in through the southern gate of Caerwith at noon, and the city was quiet, because word had come ahead, and the city had been told not to shout. The city watched from its doorways and its windows and its narrow alleys, and the city saw a healer woman on a brown horse with a wolf king walking beside her, and 2 small children in a cart behind them, and the city understood what it was looking at, and the city did not need to shout. Verlaine of House Ormsgate was not executed. That was Marith's ruling, and Caelan accepted it without argument, because Marith had said that a woman who had been bred from girlhood into a weapon was owed, at least, the chance to be something else. Verlaine was stripped of her name and her rank and sent north under guard to the old convent on the Greystair Hills, where she would spend the rest of her life, Marith said, doing a kind of work she had never once done. She would tend a garden. She would feed chickens. She would learn, if she could, what an ordinary life tasted like, and if she could not, she would at least not trouble the valleys again. The Ormsgate line was broken. The Eastern Pass was given to a lesser cousin who had spent the whole uncle's rebellion in a cellar refusing to raise his banner for either side, which Kaelin said was the old mark of a man worth trusting. The 5,000 spears were given new commanders. The white wine cellars of House Ormsgate were emptied out into the river, and the river ran a pale, sour color for 2 days, and then was clean. The binding in the cathedral, by order of the elders themselves, was unmade. In its place, on a clear evening at the end of the month, with no horns and no crowds, and only the 7 oldest wolves of the 4 rivers as witness, Kaelin Draith knelt on the moss of a small clearing above Caerwith and bared his throat to Merith Vale. "Claim me," he said, and his voice was low and steady. "Finish it. I have been half a man for over a year. Make me whole." Merith knelt in front of him. She put one hand on his jaw. She put the other on the heart of his chest. She set her teeth against the long tendon of his throat, in the old place, and she bit down. The bond closed. It did not hurt. It was not a wound. It was the sound a door makes when it finally, after a very long draught, comes all the way shut. Merith felt Kaelin pour into her. Every day of his long absence, every hour of his standing at the empty window, every ride through every valley with another woman's hand on his arm and his soul locked behind a door he had nailed shut from the inside. She felt the moment he had picked up her copper ring from the pillow in the little room behind the kitchens and had known he was never going to put it down. She felt him the night he had signed the first of the Northern Progress writs and gone back to his private rooms and put his forehead against the cold stone wall and stayed there until dawn because he did not, on that night, trust himself to lie in any bed that had ever held her memory. And he felt her. He felt the Kael garden. He felt the first labor pain in the dark. He felt Torrin's first cry. He felt Ylvi's first laugh. He felt 1,000 small Hollowmere mornings, the smell of drying motherwort and goat milk and wet pine needles, the weight of 2 small sleeping babies against a linen shift. He felt the mark in the back of her shoulder burning through all of it, and he felt, too, the moment in the Kael bed when she had heard a 14-year-old girl say his name and had thought, "He has moved on," and he felt the way that thought had almost killed her, and he wept for it. Inside her, where she could feel him weep. When she released him, they were both shaking. They were not alone in the clearing. Torrin and Ylvi were there, on a folded blanket, sitting solemnly side by side, held upright between Eric on one side and Brenneth on the other. Torrin had been watching the bite. Ylvi had been watching the wolves at the edge of the clearing. When their parents lifted their heads, both children turned, at the same instant, the way twins sometimes turn, and they looked at their mother, and then at their father, and something passed between the 4 of them that had no name in any tongue spoken in the valley. It was the old thing, the oldest thing. It was a pack recognizing itself. Ylvi laughed first. She always laughed first. Torrin, very seriously, reached out one small hand toward his father, and Kaelin, still on his knees in the moss, crossed the clearing on his knees like a man who had forgotten he had feet, and he gathered both children into his arms. And Merith came behind him and put her arms around all 3 of them, and the wolves at the edge of the clearing lowered their heads, one by one, to the earth. In the weeks that followed, the valleys settled. The crops came in heavy that year. The old priests said it was the bond. The new priests said it was the weather. The farmers said they did not care which it was, so long as the grain bins filled, and the grain bins filled. Children were born in 5 villages whose midwives had been certain their mothers were too old. A mountain lake that had gone dry 6 summers back came back in a single spring night. The wolves of the valleys sang a long, slow song at every full moon that year, and the shepherds said it sounded, to their ears, less like a hunting song and more like a lullaby. Torin grew. He was a quiet child and a watchful one, and when he laughed, which was not often, his laugh was like his father's, sudden and surprising and deep. He could slow bleeding with a look by the time he was 3. He could, by the time he was 5, put a fever out of a sick child by sitting beside the cradle and humming. He never boasted of it. He never spoke of it. He simply did it the way other children set a table. Ylvi grew. She was a loud child, and a bright one, and her laugh lit lamps, quite literally, on the nights when the storms blew out the palace candles. She could call a flame into her palm at 6. She could send the flame to a hearth across a room at 8. She was forbidden by her mother from using this skill at the dinner table, and she obeyed this rule roughly half the time, and she was not often punished for disobeying it, because her mother thought, privately, that a child with fire in her hands ought to be allowed a little mischief with it, while she was still small enough to mean no harm. Marith became, over time, a queen the 4 Rivers had not known it was waiting for. She kept her herb garden. She kept her drying rack of motherwort and silverleaf in the high palace windows. She did not wear the heavy silver the old queens had worn, because she did not like the weight of it on her neck, and the valleys, after a while, stopped expecting her to. She opened the palace kitchens to the city every winter, and she sat at the long tables with the widows of Caerwith, and she poured their tea herself, and she listened to them, and she did not always have an answer for what they told her, but she always had her hands. Kaelin became, over time, a king at peace with his own house. He walked the corridors of Caerwith at night sometimes, not because he could not sleep, but because he wanted to be sure, with his own eyes, that every corridor was what it was supposed to be. He stopped, always, at the nursery door. He opened it, always, just a little. He stood there for as long as it took, and then he closed the door, and he went back to his wife. On the long, slow evenings at the end of their lives, the wolves of the 4 Rivers told the story of the Alpha King who had thought he had moved on. They told it to their children at their hearths, and their children told it to their children, and by the time the story had passed through enough hearths, it had softened at its edges, the way old stories do, and the drug was left out, and the uncle was left out, and what remained was only the shape of the true thing. A woman walked out of a cathedral one winter night with 2 unborn children under her cloak. A king learned, a long time later and at great cost, to find her. And when he found her, he did not find her alone. He found her with 2 small watchful wolves on a blanket in a stone circle. And he knelt in the moss in front of all 3 of them, and he did not get up again until they told him he could. They never let him go, and he never let them. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.